Ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to love, I think it's quite safe to say that us as human beings will do just about anything to get the attention of a potential mate. Ladies, I'm pretty sure you've tried putting on a different shade of lipstick or an extra puff of perfume to get a guy you like to look your way. And guys, I'm certain you've done something so extremely stupid just to get a girl you like to look your way. However, there's probably been no attention-grabbing attempt as grand as that of John Hinckley Jr. for actress Jodie Foster. On March 30th, 1981, President Ronald Reagan left the Hilton Hotel in Washington, D.C. at 2:24 p.m. At 2:25 p.m., 6 bullets were shot in his direction, one of which ricocheted off his limousine and hit him in the chest, getting lodged in his lungs, but luckily he survived. The other bullets hit a police officer, a security agent, and the Secretary of Press, who was left paralyzed and would later die in 2014 of this shot. These 6 bullets came out the end of a .22 caliber gun held in the hand of none other than John Hinckley Jr. As it turns out, before this assassination attempt, Jr. wrote a bunch of love letters to Jodie Foster where he poured out his love and his desire and a bit of obsession for the actress, saying that the only way she would notice him is by him doing this assassination attempt. Jr. did not attempt to flee the scene, and he was arrested and detained then and there. He was charged for 13 crimes and sent to a fair court in front of a fair jury, but surprisingly, he was found not guilty due to reasons of insanity. As it turns out, Jr. suffered from narcissistic and schizoid personality disorder and dysthymia, and as a result was sent to St. Elizabeth's Mental Institution in Washington, where he'd spend the rest of his life. Actually, as a matter of fact, as of September 10th, 2016, about a month ago, Jr. is a free man. He got released from the institution and was sent to live with his parents in Virginia at the age of 65. Now, let's think of the situation a bit. This man attempted to get the attention of this famous actress who had no idea he existed by trying to kill one of the most important men on the planet. As a result of this attempt, he spent the rest of his life, and I quote, seeing a therapist, playing pool, watching TV, replying to mail, eating lousy food, and taking delicious medication. I mean, that sounds like my typical weekend, apart from the therapist and medication, of course. As a result, and as you could expect, the people of the United States were outraged due to the results of Hinckley's trial, and so the government was under fire, and they decided to make some changes in the way we try the mentally ill. As a result, the Insanity Defense Reform Act of 1984 was released, and with it one of the most important changes to the trials, the incompetency to stand trial rule. The incompetency to stand trial rule is relatively straightforward in its logic and reasoning. In a court of law, a defendant has the indisputable right to understand what they're being tried for and to aid in their defense. If they are found unable to aid or understand, they can legally be considered incompetent and their trial is put on hold. This decision of competency is up to the judge, and if a defendant is found incompetent, they can be sent to a mental institution or someplace to gain help in an attempt to regain their competency. Now, incompetency to stand trial should not be viewed as a get-out-of-jail-free card because, in the end, it's not a plausible form of legal defense because either you're going to become competent and continue your trial or be sent to a mental institution for the rest of your life. Now, the way I described it, the incompetency to stand trial rule seems fairly simple, but as it turns out, some cases have occurred in which it wasn't so, like the case of Cooper versus Oklahoma. In 1989, Byron Keith Cooper, an Oklahoma resident, killed an 80-year-old man during an attempted burglary. He was arrested, detained, and charged for his crimes and would be sent to trial. Now, during his pre-trial hearings, his defense attorney brought up his competency and filed for a competency claim to the judge, to which the judge obliged. The judge sought out the professional opinion of a psychologist, and they decided to send Cooper to a mental institution for 3 months where his behavior would be monitored by 2 other state psychologists. This time allotted passed, and they met up with the state psychologist, and one state psychologist strongly believed that Cooper was competent, while the other strongly believed Cooper was incompetent. But as we said before, the final decision of competency is up to the judge. So, what did he do? In the end, the judge decided to rule Cooper competent, and trial continued. On the first day of trial, Cooper was in the courtroom, but his behavior was very bizarre. He was still wearing his prison clothing because his old clothing was said to burn his skin. He was attempting to run away from his defense attorney because he had no idea who he was, and he spent the majority of the trial balled up in the fetal position, talking to himself. Obviously, his defense attorney files for another competency claim to which the judge obliges, but this time the judge takes matters into his own hands. He listens to witness testimonies who have interacted with Cooper before, he analyzes Cooper's behavior himself, and he seeks the professional opinion of yet another state psychologist who again strongly believes Cooper is incompetent. However, as we mentioned before, the final decision of competency is on the judge, and the judge still decides to rule him competent, and so trial continues. It gets to the sentencing phase of trial, and Cooper's defense attorney, in a last-ditch attempt to save his client, brings up his abusive childhood. He does this in an attempt to get a mistrial or another competency hearing, but this time the judge does not oblige, and Cooper is sentenced to death via the death penalty. Now, let's step back and think about this whole situation a bit. Cooper, an obviously incompetent defendant, was about to be killed despite his obvious incompetent behavior. We said before that if a defendant is unable to understand what he's being tried for, or the defendant is unable to aid in their defense, then they can legally be considered incompetent. So Cooper's behavior, considering the fact that he was running away from his defense attorney, showing he didn't even know he was being tried in the first place, and balling up in the fetal position and talking to himself on the courtroom floor, showing that he couldn't be able to defend himself anyway, shows that he should have legally been considered incompetent. So why wasn't he? Well, as it turns out at the time, Oklahoma and 4 other states like it had a relatively high standard of proof needed to be reached in order to be considered incompetent. So was a man about to lose his life due to the fact that the lawmakers were unable to create a standard standard of proof? As it turns out, no. In a last-ditch attempt to save his life, Cooper sent in an appeal to the US Supreme Court to look through the trial again. In the end, the Supreme Court gave him a mistrial due to the judgments of the judge, and as a result of Cooper versus Oklahoma as a whole, the government decided to revamp the laws and create a standard of proof for incompetency. However, there have been some cases in which the ending is not so happy and the effect is not so great, like that of Ray Rector. One night, Rector and his friends were out on the town and about to go to a nightclub before they were stopped by a bouncer because one of his friends could not pay the simple entrance fee of $3. As a result of this, Rector did the logical obvious thing and took out his gun and fired at the bar. No problem, ended up killing 2 people. He decided to flee the scene and hide with his family for a couple of weeks until he finally decided to give himself up. The policeman showed up to his door, he entered his house, and before being cuffed, Rector yet again took out his gun and fired at the policeman, killing him. Rector was then sentenced and detained and was sent to court where he would be found guilty of homicide of the police officer and the 2 other men he killed. And as a result, he was sentenced to death via the death penalty. Now, the day before his execution came, and it was time for him to have his final meal. For those of you who don't know what a final meal is, it's just that. You're about to be killed the next day, so this is the last meal you have in your life. Rector decided to go for a fairly simple final meal, eating some fried chicken, some fruit juice, and a slice of pie. He ate the chicken, finished it up, drank the juice, and ate half of his pie before pushing it aside on the table. The correctional officer said, "Rector, why aren't you finishing your pie?" And he looked at him in all seriousness and said, "Oh, I'm saving it for later." Obviously, for Rector, there would be no later because he would be executed the next day. So why was he saying this? As it turns out, after shooting at the police officer, Rector took the gun and pointed it at his own head in an attempt to kill himself. As a result of this, he missed and ended up only firing at the left portion of his brain, giving himself a lobotomy. He was incompetent during his trial, he was incompetent during his sentencing, and he was incompetent during his final meal because physically he was missing a chunk of his brain. Sadly, the result of Rector's case did not end as happily as that of Cooper's because he was still set to be executed the next day. Now, there are 2 ways we can view Rector's case. There's one way in which we say, oh, Rector was a criminal, he killed 3 people, he should have died anyway. But the issue with this view is that the incompetency to stand trial rule was made for a reason. It's a law, so it must be followed. The other view that we can find, and this is probably a more extreme view, is that criminals might find motivation or inspiration in the acts of Rector and attempt to make themselves incompetent so they don't have to face the justice of their actions. Aside from Cooper versus Oklahoma and Ray Rector's cases and a handful of others like it, the incompetency to stand trial rule has proven to be beneficial in the way we try the mentally ill after they commit a crime. But the issue we face today as a society is trying to figure out how to not make them commit a crime in the first place. Now, treating and trying to cure the mentally ill can be seen as immensely frustrating, ineffective, and counterproductive. And this became apparent to me in the summer of 2014. This summer, I spent my time in Chicago living with my aunts and cousins, and one of my cousins was assigned to go work in a mental institution for Eastern European refugees. I remember him coming home one day telling me the story of this middle-aged woman who suffered from schizophrenia. He told me she'd spend all her days with her hands on her head, listening to things that weren't there and seeing people that weren't there, and no matter what he did when it came to questioning or just getting to know what was going on, she wouldn't respond. She was living in her own world, and there were outsiders telling her that what she saw and what she heard was fake. Now, if you can't wrap your head around this concept, think of it this way. I finish my speech, you leave the auditorium, and there's a man standing out there that's saying, "Oh, you know that guy wearing the red shirt talking about the mentally ill? Yeah, he never existed." That's hard to imagine because you can see me, you can hear me, and you can feel this setting because this is reality. For that schizophrenic patient and those like her, that's not the case. They see things that we can't simply because of the anatomy of their brain. Now, schizophrenia is a relatively more rare disease when it comes to the mentally ill, but there is a disorder that affects millions of people around the world today, and that is depression. As it turns out, depression is in fact a mental disorder and is not just a feeling of extreme sadness that you can get over by watching a happy movie or listening to some happy songs. It's a really big deal. Depression is the result of a chemical imbalance in your brain of the three chemicals dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. As a result of this chemical imbalance, you have a lack of motivation, you have a lack of sleep, your decision-making is skewed, and overall, you just feel sad. Now, sometimes this depression in people can be fatal, like in the example of Germanwings Flight 9525. One of the co-pilots of this flight was clinically depressed, but he failed to tell the company about it. During the flight, he locked out his fellow co-pilot from the cockpit and proceeded to fly the plane into the side of the mountain, killing himself and all 150 passengers on the plane. Obviously, for some mentally ill people, the only way that they consider themselves normal or regular is by committing crimes and committing violence, whether it be on themselves by committing suicide or on others during a mass shooting. And the issue we face as a society and a community today is trying to do things to make them feel normal. The first thing that we must do as a community and society is to make mental health care access more easily accessible. Here in these two cartoons is the current situation of the access to mental health care in the United States. Evidently, it is much more easier to walk into a gun store and buy a gun and wreak havoc on the community than it is to climb up those large steps to get to a psychologist who he himself doesn't even look interested in you. And it seems like the medication, the cure to mental illnesses is bullets, because to some people, that's their reality. They feel like the only way to feel normal and the only way to fit in is to cause crime and wreak havoc on the community. Now, unless one of us in this room is a politician or in some really high place, there's not much we can do about this. But there is something we can do as individuals, and that is raising awareness. In our society today, mentally ill, the idea of someone having a mental illness has a relative negative connotation surrounding it. And as a result, people who suffer from mental illnesses kind of feel ashamed to go out and seek help, talk to their friends, talk to their peers, and talk to their families about their issue. As a result of this, all their emotions get bottled up inside of them and they have no one to go to. So they find it that the only way to let out this emotion is, again, by causing crimes or wreaking havoc on the society. In the end, when it comes to the mentally ill, ignorance truly is bliss. And it is up to you to decide whether you want to continue ignoring this real issue in our society or you want to do something about it in an attempt to benefit everyone. I'd like to end this speech with a quote I found made by the Washington Post, which I think truly encompasses the whole situation as a whole and encompasses my views of the situation as a whole quite perfectly. It reads, "Helping people who have severe mental illness is compassionate, expensive, and one of the best long-term investments that our society can make." Thank you.